It falls to me to introduce the marvelous Mary to you tonight, though I imagine she's well known to most people. Mary first got involved in Mill Road Cemetery thanks to a tour by Ian Bent. So Ian, if you're in the house, thank you very much. One of the very best things you did was get Mary involved in Mill Road Cemetery. It's entirely due to Mary that we've done as much mapping of monuments as we have done in the cemetery, because she's absolutely indefatigable about locating graves. She'll clamber under bushes where I don't ever want to go, and she's just amazing at that kind of thing. But also, as a keen member of the Cambridge Family History Society, she's had an awful lot to do with researching everybody who's buried in Mill Road Cemetery and posting it on our website. And tonight's talk, I know, is going to focus on some of the stories that we've been sent. Every grave in Mill Road Cemetery website has a little message on it saying, if you've got information about this family, please get in touch. And we're blessed because an awful lot of people do get in touch and tell us all sorts of things we don't want to know. We do want to know, sorry, I got that one wrong.
Sorry, Caro, I accidentally muted you.
Caro, you have to unmute yourself to finish your little introduction.
Well, I think that was a signal, Mary, that it's time for me to hand over to you, with many thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Right, so this is the point where if you want, you can just change your view so you don't see any of us, including me, or you can just leave me talking on the screen. But I am going to be reading some of my talk because I only finished it at lunchtime today. I started it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, mind you, but I'm very, very slow. But I'd like to think I'm very thorough too. If you are one of my contributors, and I have informed everybody who's I've used their stories, and some of them are here tonight, if I don't do your story justice, I'm really sorry. Sometimes I've had to cut them down to the bare bones, but they are all on the website. And as we go through, I've put up the code, the Cambridge Family History Society code that we use. So if you want to search for them yourself and read the whole story, you can. And I'll talk more as we go along. I've put in the chat box some links that you might find useful to save you having to ask me at the end. The easiest way of recording those is to do a little screenshot of them right now, if you like, or you may want to leave it to the end. But it's just that, you know, when we get to the end of the talk, we have lots of questions and things come in, and then you might not be able to find them so easily. So I'm going to share my screen now. Have I been made? Is that now okay for that, Simon?
Yep, should be fine.
And my talk is there. So is that nice and big for you, everybody? Is it full screen for everybody?
Yes, you're fine.
Because I can go to enter full screen. I think does that look better?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I'll just take all the pictures off. Okay, this is my talk. That doesn't work. In 2017, we were contacted by Ros Batchelor from York with some research he was doing on Percy John Spalding, who was a town clerk of the city of York from 1913 to 1934, in which capacity his photo often was found in the local papers. He was easy to spot as he was very tall and always wore his gown and his wig. And I think you can all see that there he is. Ros became interested in this gentleman when she came across his signature on documents linked to the conscientious objector tribunals in York during World War I. That was something she was studying at the time. Percy was taken ill after he had given a lecture on the work of the town clerk and died before a doctor could be fetched. In his obituary, it says, Mr. Spalding, who was also clerk of the peace, register of the court of the record, secretary to the U's navigation, clerk to the mental hospital, etc., was 56 years of age. He belonged to a family which had distinguished itself in local life in Cambridge, and his brother is Mayor of Cambridge this year. He was an archaeologist of standing, a strong High Church member, and a member of the Friends of York Minster, and a regular attender of all the services at the Minster. His body was returned to Cambridge, where he was buried with his parents, William and Martha Spalding. That's not working. Again, I'm having a bit of trouble here because when I go down to the, there we go, it covers up with something else. So this, I think I got a better photograph of that. Ros, if she's watching, will probably say, yes, I sent you one, but I lost it. And here's his brother Alex, who was Mayor of Cambridge in 1934. Some family resemblance, I think. And here's his father, William Potter Spalding, who was also Mayor of Cambridge, but well known for historians because he was the person that compiled the Spalding's directory. He was a stationer, and he had a shop, as you can see here, at 43 Sydney Street. And this copy is the 1879 version, which is on the Bodleian, free to download from the Bodleian Library, and I've put the link up for you. And here, sadly, is his grave, when we're not even sure which one it is. I made Caro uncover this in case there was some inscription, but we found nothing. But we know it's two of these, one of these. I think it might be this one, and this might be Duke's, but we don't have a grave register for this area, and we're relying entirely on the Cambridge Family History Society and the maps that they made 20 years ago. William Potter's wife, Martha, was the daughter of John and Charlotte Goodliffe. This grave of her parents is just in front of hers and her husband's. They were butchers, very well-known butchers, and they had a shop for a very long time at 26 Sydney Street. Martha Spalding had a younger brother named Walter, and he was a curate and an inventor. And we've now moved to the start of the story that Tony Whitmore sent me. This is his invention, which this painting was not in the end taken up in the States. This is from the American, but it may have been in England, I'm not sure. But it was for a special bed rest so that you could actually sit up in bed. And obviously things like this have been invented quite a lot, but this is for a lovely brass bedstead, and you'd fold it back under the mattress or something. Whoops. and Rosa was his wife, and she was Rosa Whitmore before she married. We only just found their grave, and that is thanks again to the grave register for Andrew the Great. And that's all I've been able to see, was just Walter's name. It's curbstones that are broken, and it's under a big laurel bush. Rosa was the daughter of wine merchant George and his wife Mary. I have included a link to the premises of the Whitmore wine shop that's on Captain Cambridge. It's a really nice picture. They're just on the corner of Downing Street and Market Hill. It seems her vocation was to care for her parents and then her sister's children. But all the same, she found time to court Walter, who she eventually married at the age of 43. We have only just found their monument, which is hidden under the laurel bush, and I've said that already. It is in the same row as her younger brother, George Frederick Whitmore. Oops, and here is George Frederick Whitmore. He was a very energetic man, and he's jumped one place ahead. So here is George Whitmore's grave, and with his wife Edith, and next to his grave is Edith's parents' grave, and this is right at on the west wall that goes along by Angular Ruskin. It's rather a overgrown area, and it was we mapped it quite a few years ago now. Her father, John Ellison, had this studio portrait taken by Arthur Nichols, and Arthur Nichols was the first person to have a photography shop in Post Office Terrace. And those of you who know about Post Office Terrace and all the photographs and the wonderful collection that they have in the Cambridge collection in the library. And I've put that link up. Somebody has made a wonderful site talking about all the photographers that were working in Cambridge. This picture of Edith was when she was about 18 years old, maybe an engagement photograph. But, I think Tony sent this to us about 3 years ago, and it was one of my favourite photographs. Now you can come in now, Mr. George Frederick Whitmore. A very imposing character, as you can see here. He took over his father's wine merchant business, Whitmore and Co. And I just happened to come across, this is called an overstamp, this little stamp here, it's on a penny stamp, and people collect these apparently. And in my Google searches, I come across all sorts of things. Thought you'd just like to see that. And Tony might like to see it as well. The reason he's wearing a gown over the top of his army uniform is that when he came back from the Boer War, he was awarded the Freedom of Cambridge and an MA from Cambridge University. He brought with him a present for his wife, Edith, which was a little bracelet. More of that later. He was a very industrious gentleman. As well as taking over the family wine merchants, he had a military career in the 3rd Volunteer Battalion, Cambridge, from circa 1887, serving the Boer War and the RAF in 1918. He moved, serving the Boer War, World War I and the RAF in 1918. He moved to the family to Methwold, Norfolk, where he became the first licensed commercial grower of tobacco in England. We do not often hear much about the women, but we do know that Edith was not pleased, as in her own words, being dragged off to the sticks and lost in West Norfolk. I'm sure there are others who felt like that. George also loved sailing on the Ouse, and he was presented with an engraved silver cigarette case by King Edward. King Edward, as you may remember, did not reign for very long, so this trophy was greatly prized. Cricket also took up a lot of his time, and he was a founder member of the Cambridge Cricket Association. To find out more about the energetic Mr. Whitmore, you can read his obituary on the MRC post. You can't read it just yet because I haven't put it up yet. Tony keeps sending more and more stuff, and I just can't keep up with him. Rosa and George's eldest sister was Elizabeth, and she married Francis de Lisle. Francis, originally from Ireland, was manager at Rivington's The Publishers at 19 Trinity Street. He then became a wine merchant, so probably worked with Elizabeth's father. They are buried in St. Paul's parish, but 2 of their 3 children are buried close to their uncle and aunt in that same row in Andrew the Great. The photo of Francis was taken by Scott and Wilkinson, who were at 47 St. Andrew's Street. Francis died aged 45. Elizabeth and her daughter went to live with her father in this picture. Elizabeth is wearing a bracelet made from gold 10 Kruger punts, and that's the very same little bracelet that the family still have that came back from the Boer War. The coins were minted by President Kruger up until the Boer War. It had been given to her sister Edith when George Frederick came back. I'm giving you a nice time to look at the pictures because I've lost my... Yeah. Sometimes there is no monument, but if there is a grave register, we might be able to locate a grave. This is what the grave register looks like because I took the photographs for the Cambridge Family History Society in the archives a few years ago now, and was then sent the transcription back to correct it. And I have been doing that ever since, on and off. But all the other things I do in the cemetery prevent me from ever finishing it. I think Caro might remember when we sat at her kitchen table one day and did probably 2 or 3 pages. We've mapped this area of the cemetery. This is St. Andrew the Great, the south section. This is the west wall where the last graves I talked about came from. And this is the grave I'm going to talk about now. I was actually working in the cemetery not long ago when Steve came along. Steve Wright, who actually, Steve Robertson, who emailed us in January this year and asked if I knew where his relatives were buried. Luckily, he knew that it was Andrew the Great, and we're very appreciative of people who actually find out which parish their relatives are buried in, because it saves us having to do extra searching. Then later, I was working in the cemetery in April, and he just happened to walk by, and he was on his way to have a look. So I took a break from my city council volunteer work and brought him up to show him the grave. So I knew where Rash was because I just remembered that name because when we mapped the cemetery, and we discovered Gigney, which the Cambridge Family History Society hadn't found before, and so it's in this area here. And this photo was taken only the other day, so it's not too overgrown, and I wonder if Steve has actually been and cleared it a little bit. Buried here are Henry and Rhonda Wright, a working class couple from out of town who settled in Doric Street, which was a poor area. They raised 11 children. Like so many men in that era, Henry had left his village to work in London on the railway in Islington, then as a gardener in Dulwich, where he met and married Rhoda Dance in 1881. Rhoda too had left her family home in Reading to work as a domestic servant. During the 1880s, it appears they tried life with Rhoda's family, their second son being born in Wantage, and then with Henry's parents, as their next 3 children were born in Borough Green, before settling in Cambridge, where Henry worked as a painter and decorator. In 1892, Henry applied to the Charity Commission for help finding work for him and Rhoda. It seems they were successful, as by 1901, Rhoda was working as a cook and Henry had found work as a painter and decorator. As so often happens with these stories, we hear much about the men and little about the women. But in this story, it was Rhoda who got her name in the paper. I think you can read the title of that, but you might not be able to read the rest. But basically, she was commended because she had 6 sons in the war in 1915, I think it was. And the king wrote her a letter. I am commanded by the king to convey to you an expression of His Majesty's appreciation of the patriotic spirit which has prompted your 6 sons and son-in-law to give their services at the present time to the Army and Navy. The king was much gratified to hear of the manner of which they have so readily responded to the call of their sovereign and their country, and I am to express to you and to them His Majesty's congratulations on having contributed in so full a measure to the great something for which all the people of the British Empire are so bravely fighting. And you can read more about the military careers of her sons on the website. The next story didn't come directly from somebody who was telling me a story. I just happened to read it in a little book written by my friend Shelley Lockwood, who was writing about Frederick Leach, who was a Cambridge art workman and did a lot of the historic painting. And of course, if anybody knows about the David Parr house, David Parr was one of his workers. And in her little book, on page 30, she writes, small painting jobs included an annual job to paint a croquet set for furniture for Mr. Miller, the milkman. And here is Mr. Miller, the milkman. He was a bit more than just a milkman because he actually did own a dairy, but he did start off as a milkman, and his lovely wife. And I think that was them. I've got no proof of it, but it seems very likely. On the next page, she writes, of the Cambridge lettering of tomb of son for Mr. Rowe of Brunswick Place. Now, Mr. Rowe, who lived in Brunswick Place, had this tomb done for his son, and obviously his name was added as well. So poor William, the son, only took over the job of butler for 3 months before he died. His elder brother was Richard Reynolds Rowe, obviously much more famous than William, and you can read about him in AG 275. It's a very impressive, the lettering is very distinctive, and it's right by the path, on the central path. So I think you should all be able to find it easily if you go and visit the cemetery. The next contributor was the Hattersley grave, and that's Caroline Wilson, not Caro, who spoke to you earlier, but a different Caroline Wilson, and she sent this information. She sent me this lovely picture, which I think probably comes from the Cambridgeshire collection, because the Hattersleys had a shop right next to St Michael's Church in Trinity Street, and this was their shop. I'm not sure the state of the monument at the moment, but it's on the east path, right against the path, and this was taken on a lovely sunny day, and when the area was quite clear. I'm not sure how clear it is now. And the story is this. It's just one story I've chosen. When the Trinity Street shop was being rebuilt in 1850, a medieval earthenware jug was discovered in the excavations. William Hattersley immediately saw the potential for marketing copies of the jug to undergraduates and tourists, and approached his friend J. Wedgwood about producing such a jug. Wedgwood obliged, and the Cambridge ale jug was born. It was made in 9 different sizes and was exhibited on the Wedgwood stand at the Great Exhibition in 1851. There's lots more about the Hattersleys on the webpage. And then I have some series of little stories of things that have happened, which show us how the cemetery has changed in the last 173 years. I would appeal to anybody who might have photographs that they've taken in the past to send them in to us. We are always really anxious to see pictures from, well, 20 years ago. And if anybody finds pictures for earlier than that, we'd love to see them. This photo, which may have been taken soon after her death, usually they have to leave a little while for the ground to settle before a monument is erected. It's Julia Wicks, who died young, and it was sent to her brother in Australia. And then Claire, who does a lot of the research, contacted the family via Ancestry, and they sent her this photograph. This photo was also done by Scott and Wilkinson. What I really like about it, apart from the fact that you can really see her headstone really nicely there, because it's now fallen and broken, but here is the gardener, and here's his wheelbarrow. Oh, and I've just remember something I've missed off. And this is the view this week. Julia's headstone lies here. This is this large tomb just here, also rather cracked. We cleared this area in November last year as part of the ongoing clearance of various areas, part of the management plan of the cemetery. So this was another volunteer day for the Cambridge City Volunteers. The thing that stands out most is the fact that the paths look exactly the same, because we had the paths redone 2 or 3 years ago. And before that, well, they were very, very muddy. And we like people to walk on the paths because we're trying to save the grass. This is another photograph. I spent a happy half hour under a bush trying to find this with Jay, who came to look for her parents, her relatives' grave. And you can see it's a very pretty headstone. Poor Minnie died of TB when she was young. And this is standing on the south path, looking towards the north of the cemetery. So you can see the big yew trees here that stand along the central path. And what is interesting, how popular in the 20s these glass globes were that you put flowers inside. After Minnie died, when her parents died, their inscription was added here. Minnie lived in Vinery Road with her parents, and her elder brother Ted survived the song and took this picture coming back on the train with all the wounded soldiers. Ted lived in Vinery Road, and his son lived in Vinery Road, and altogether the family lived there for 100 years. And I think Ted had the first car in Vinery Road, or maybe even this part of Romsey. This photograph was sent to us a few years ago. We were all very excited about it. Julia was a student at the time that she took it, and she took it from her one of the rooms in Anglia Ruskin, right at the top. I couldn't get into that room because all the rooms were locked. Well, I managed to get into the building and get all the way up the stairs, and tried taking a photograph out a bathroom window, but it didn't work. So I had to climb the stairs from the outside. But it gives you a really good idea of how the cemetery has changed. And I think it's one of our favourite photographs. This yew tree here is this tree here, and they're slow growing, you can see. I mean, it's only taken 40 years to get to that. But this monument, we've not been able to see because it's all covered in ivy. So it's really nice to be able to actually know where it is. And that's one of the Vales, who were whitesmiths, also in Post Office Terrace. And it's been really helpful for me to actually see this area before we mapped it, so I could see how many brick graves I was missing, or monuments, should I say. Between all the monuments, where there are spaces, there weren't necessarily any monuments here that have gone. They may well have just been graves, because people who were poor didn't actually have headstones or curbstones. And some people just chose not to have them. You can see there's nothing actually. There's no trees in here, and there's no yew tree here, which there is here now. And then I happened across this photograph when I found my old mate Roy Hammond's website, and he actually I'd met him when we were doing the bathhouse, taking all the baths out and making it into a community centre. So that was back in the mid-70s. And this is the only headstone that you can now see, which is here, although there is, I think, one here that you can see right at the back along that wall, but that's probably overgrown now. So it was really valuable, and I asked him if he'd send me a high resolution copy, which he did, and I've used them on all the posts that are relevant. And then Simon Ball sent us this photograph. This is where his dad's elbow was, so I just photoshopped that out. But this is looking right across, and you can see all the houses in Norfolk Terrace, which you can't do now. And I think this might be Kennedy's grave from the Latin primer, quite a famous university professor, and we uncovered it a few years ago, but it's all overgrown again now. These graves are the Lincoln family. James, who's buried on this side, James was head wood carver for Ratty and Kett. Sarah Kett was his maternal aunt. And it was through Simon that I found out about the Kett Rebellion. And that's all written up on George Kett's grave post over in St. Paul's. James's daughter Ethel, and this is her plot here. She was a teacher and she died at the age of 39. She was another victim of TB, died very tragically. And because I've mentioned the mapping before, this is the area that we mapped just recently in last month. And we did 80 out of the 119 monuments there. And Tim Glasswell, who's a wonderful man from the Ordnance Survey, who comes and maps for us as a volunteer, he's going to come back later and we'll finish that parish. This is the parish that I'm working on now. And if anybody wants to join us, the sort of thing that I'll be doing is trying to get all the rows written down as rows, and we've got no grave register for this area, and so I just do it all by eye, and then when we map them in rows. And I think you can see that when we first started back in the day, 2014, I think, these were the first parishes we did, and we didn't really know about the rows then. We just took a reading from every grave we saw. But then I kind of began to notice that they did look as if they were all in rows. So then you can see that they look a lot tidier now. This was probably one of the most difficult areas. This is that west wall, because we didn't uncover an awful lot of the graves at that point. And this is the meadow area, the Norfolk Street Gate, which was nice and easy because not a lot grows there. It's very poor soil, and not even the wildflowers want to grow in our wildflower meadow. And so that's the end of my talk. So I'm going to stop my share now and back over to questions.
Thank you very much, Mary. Very interesting stuff. So, I will just repost the list of links because you may not have seen it if you came in late. But in the meantime, does anyone have any questions for Mary? Please just unmute yourself and ask away.
No, I've told them everything they
Where
need.
do you find the energy, Mary?
Well, actually, what is very nice is something that I've missed recently is, well, during COVID, first lockdown, I didn't dare go down Mill Road, so I didn't go into the cemetery at all, and I really missed doing that mapping work. But this year I've been back in, and as that area is really nice and sunny, and flat and just grass, and it's just been really pleasant just finding the graves and taking the photographs and then coming back and putting them on the site. Unfortunately, doing this talk has meant I've not actually had time to do anything for the last 2 weeks, but I shall get back to it tomorrow.
It was lovely to see those photographs of 1979. And it's such a shame that everything is overgrown, but we know it's like painting the Forth Bridge, isn't it? Trying to keep the brambles down and things like that. It's quite shocking, really, seeing how it was in 79.
But it wouldn't be like that now, because obviously those well, I mean, the one light of Julia Wicks's grave was taken soon after, so the cemetery had only been in existence for 50 years, and those graves were all lovely and white and pristine. And now, of course, the curbstones especially just sort of fall apart. And I know we've had a lot of vandalism, but sometimes gravestones do just fall over by themselves. And the other day, the back of a headstone rather than the front just sheared off completely. Just the whole the sort of covering layer just fell straight off down on the floor, and is still there. Just so. And then, of course,
done a lot of damage, though, hasn't it? Nature has, with brambles and things.
They have, but then on the other hand, the nature is truly wonderful at the moment, and it's been a real sanctuary for animals and people during the last terrible year.
It's such a large area, isn't it, as we know?
Yeah.
To look after.
What I've really loved, Mary, is that you're always doing yourself down. You always say to me, oh goodness, I get distracted. But thank goodness you get distracted. Look at all the amazing things you found, like those jugs. I had no idea. It's brilliant what you do.
Well, that's down to all the people who send in the stories. I mean,
well, thank you all of them too, but it's you as well.
But that's why, I mean, I was completely overwhelmed 2 years ago. I can't remember when Claire actually joined us, but I was so desperate because I just couldn't keep up. And Ian was writing a book, so he didn't have time to do much work. And I just couldn't keep up with all the people who were writing in with their stories. And so lucky that Claire came along, because she's very fast at research and writing up. And I've still got a list of about 50 monuments that I've started. And every now and again, she sends me, like today, a message saying, shall I finish this one for you?
So we've got a question from Nikki.
Mary, do we know much about who made the memorial stones? Was it mostly people like Ratty and Kate? Do we know anything about?
We've got a few. I heard a rumour, and Ian might know more about this than me, that it wasn't done to put your name on the bottom of a memorial stone. But for instance, the Delisles were done by Rutley, or I can't quite remember the name now, but from London. So goodness knows why they actually came from London to do the stone. But we've got Hibbett and one or two others. And on the site, I think Ian did a page about the different ones he'd found. I found Thompson as well. That was another firm that made them. So I do find the stone names occasionally. And Ian did a good job finding quite a lot.
Thank you. I'll look on the side.
If anyone wants to help us with that, it would be terrific.
Yeah, there are 5 monumental masons in 1914 in Cambridge. Tibbets, Iverton Reed, Leighton and Leach, Mansfield and Stanbridge.
Oh yes, Stanbridge, yeah.
Rosa, do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, is that me?
Hello.
Rosa,
Yeah.
I've
Ros,
got
I'm
a
Ros.
hand up.
Sorry.
Ro-
Mary, I just wanted to second Mary's sentiment, what you said earlier about the cemetery having been a sanctuary, especially in the past year. So we went for walks there almost daily, and it's just so beautiful to observe the seasons, and you get a whole different feel for the seasons if you immerse yourself in nature and with the flowers blossoming. And now it's absolutely gorgeous. It's such a wildlife paradise. So it's so wonderful to see that. But of course, I mean, one concern is vandalism. And I was wondering, are you doing something? Are you taking photographs of pictures of graves to then compare what vandalism was done to them, or what are you doing to track or to
We've
track
got
vandalism?
a section on the site that we, every time a monument falls, we can't always say that they're vandalised. Sometimes we do know they are, but we call them monuments under review. So basically, I add that as a tag so that we know all the monuments that we've lost or are in some sort of danger of being lost. I mean, obviously, I've been heartbroken by some of the things that have happened in the last few years, because I gave a tour and I had got certain monuments on it, and they were quite impressive, and they were all destroyed in a matter of weeks. So yeah, but there's nothing much we can. It's an open space. It's open 24/7, and there's nothing much we can do about it. But we do repair monuments sometimes, but it is really expensive.
Okay.
It is expensive, and there are
Sorry, Caro. We
also
keep...
two views about it. There are people around who feel that it is a waste of, oh, sorry, just it's a waste of money. Some people feel it's a waste of money to repair monuments. That tends not to be the view amongst the history group.
Just nice to know about Victorian enterprise with the Hendersons finding a medieval jug and contacting Wedgwood and making it into the Cambridge mug and selling hundreds and hundreds of them probably.
Yes, they always, I mean, they knew how to grab an opportunity, didn't they?
Yeah, amazing.
Did you want to say something, Ros?
I did, yes. Thanks. Well, first of all, I apologise for joining you late. I'm just on my way back from holiday, but wanted to thank Mary for showing me. I don't know if you did mention Percy John Spalding earlier.
It was the first story.
Oh, was it? Oh, that's a shame. Well, I'll have to watch the recording. Yes, but it was really nice having found that he was I live in York, he was our town clerk and he died here. He sounds like he had a heart attack just as he was about to give a talk about, I think it was about history actually, because he was a very keen archaeologist. But he was brought back to Cambridge and buried in Cambridge, and I happened to be coming down to Cambridge for a weekend, and Mary very kindly showed me where his grave is thought to be. So that was great fun, and it's just an amazing place. It's a cemetery. It's yeah, we have one here in York, but nothing on that scale. And it was the one here was a private cemetery as compared. The interesting thing I think about the Mill Road Cemetery is the way it brings together the different parishes. I think that's absolutely amazing. Yeah.
And
so thank you, Mary, for your help.
Well, thank you for supplying me with the information in the first place. And of course, then when I because you missed that bit, but it linked in very well with the next story that we were sent by Tony Whitmore, because through marriage. So as soon as Tony sent me that one, I thought, oh yes, well I know, hang on, I know who the Spaldings are, you know. So it's like, but this happens all the time. We go all over the cemetery linking families up, and we try and link them all on the website. So if you're reading about one story, you can jump to another member of the family and find out what happened to them.
Mhm. Well, I don't know if you used the pictures of Percy wearing his wig, even
Yes.
when he was at a bridge opening, and he was at a royal visit, and he just wore his town clerk's wig everywhere, and which I think is really funny. I was tickled by that. Perhaps he was bald. Who knows?
Mary, you mentioned the mother of the 6 sons who
Boys,
went
yes.
to the First World War. Are any of the sons remembered in the cemetery?
I don't know. I don't think so. But you can read what happened to them, because they all had military careers, which Steve might like to come in here. But if with poor families who had a lot of children, one of the ways that the boys could actually make a life for themselves was going into the military. So they did actually, a lot of the sons joined up, and they all had quite good careers. But Steve, did you want to add to that?
Well, I can add to it, yes. It was always part of our family folklore that the sons all fought in World War I, and they all came back, and that's very true. They did all come back. One of them, unfortunately for him, he joined on August the 15th, 1914. The day after war was declared, and he was taken prisoner of war on August the 26th, and then finally was returned in 1919. But they did all come back, had very different wars. One called Sydney, he trained in Aldershot, was sent to Doncaster, went to Shorefleet, and that was his war. He never landed on the continent at all. And yet you compare that with the one who was made prisoner of war. My uncle, who was called Albert, was wounded at Mons. Sorry, not Mons, at Luz. So very, very different wars, but they all came back. And in answer to your question, Robin, as far as I know, none of them are buried in Mill Road Cemetery.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Nice to see you.
And you.
I feel often with my I correspond with people for such a long period sometimes that I feel like they've become old mates, you know. But I've actually met, obviously I've met Ros, I met Jay, and I've met Steve, and I don't know if Tony Whitmore is actually in the room. He might be watching on Facebook, but you can make yourself known if you are, Tony. Tony sent me so much stuff in the last couple of weeks, but I just didn't have time to put more up. So I'm going to be working on his website tomorrow, on his webpage tomorrow.
That was an absolute delight. So thank you very much. You are amazing. The breadth of your knowledge is just extraordinary. And I think we all had a lovely evening. On behalf of Mill Road History Society, can I just invite you all to our next event, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, July the 13th. And that is, thank you, Robin, in conjunction with the Folk Club, and is Julie Peasgood and the Emily Peasgood, sorry, and the Cambridge North Cambridge Song Project. I'm looking forward to it very much, and I hope to see some of you there. But first, let's do a quick round of applause for Mary, shall we? Thanks ever so, Mary. You were a star.